I want to extend a formal welcome to all of you. And thank you again for joining today's webinar titled Reimagining Schools, Serving Newcomers, Building Belonging, and Activating Community. And as a reminder, this is the first of two webinars that we'll be presenting on this, and we'll share more about that a little later on. But again, thank you for joining today's webinar. My name's Anthony Salas. I'm the events director with Welcoming America. And before we do get started, I do want to go over just a few quick housekeeping items with you. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be sharing it out with you probably by the end of the week. So look for that coming your way. It is going out to everyone who registered. So if you know anyone who registered and isn't able to join us today, you can let them know they will be getting a copy of the recording, as well as any resources that are shared. So everyone will get that. If there are any AI bots that are sent in to record, we will be removing those because we are providing the recording. So just want to make sure everyone is aware of that. And as I mentioned earlier, the chat box is viewable only to us as hosts and panelists. So you as attendees will not see what other attendees are entering into the chat, but still feel free to use it. Especially for anything technical related to the Zoom platform. If you need help with anything, we'll be monitoring that. If you have any questions as the presentation goes on related to the content that's being shared, please use the Q&A feature and enter your questions there. We're going to be leaving a little bit of time at the end of the presentation for questions, so we'll make sure to cover as many as we can there. For those of you that are not familiar or not members of Welcoming America's network, I do want to just spend a few moments talking to you a little bit about our organization. Welcoming America is a national nonprofit organization that leads a movement of inclusive communities and works with our members of over about 300 current members that are comprised of nonprofit and government organizations spread out across the country. And those members benefit from different things such as expert coaching, strategy planning, access to member-only events and resources, as well as a diverse offering of practical communities of practice. They also get really great interaction with each other via our member forum. And so there's a lot of great benefits to membership. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I do encourage you to go to welcomingamerica.org. There is a tab there related to Welcoming Network, and you can learn more there. So again, in the interest of time, didn't want to spend a lot of time on housekeeping. We want to get right into our presentation. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. We're being joined by Misha Lamb-Bell, who is the program director with Reimagining Migration, and also Marie Duperval, who is an assistant principal and Reimagining Migration ambassador. Who will be joining us a little later. So again, we're very honored and excited to have Reimagining Migration sharing this information today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Misha to get us started.
Thank you so much, Anthony, and I'm really excited to be here with you all. Okay. Just want to confirm that we can all see that screen, and amazing. So first, I want to kick us off with just an agenda as some of the things that we are going to go over today, and also to encourage you all to potentially have a notebook or a piece of paper where you might want to journal your thoughts or questions in. And first, with starting off our agenda, we're going to lean into a little bit about imagination, and then dive into who we are as an organization, discuss some of the newcomer and immigrant origin youth findings that we have, discuss belonging, what it looks like, what it means, what it feels like, and then really imagining schools as community centers, what that could mean for all of us, and then dive into a little bit of Marie's work, who is going to be our co-presenter, and all of the things that she's doing in her community, and then kind of ending with some next steps. So thank you all again for being with us here today, and I'm really excited to be doing this work alongside all of you. Now, I want to kick us off a little bit with a conversation as to what's happening in the present moment. And so I just want to take a moment to read one of these recent headlines here, saying in Springfield, Ohio, schools are opening Tuesday with increased security amid threats linked to claims about Haitian immigrants. And the reason why we're starting here is just want to ground ourselves in what is happening, especially as we're here on a webinar discussing welcoming and really picturing what it might feel like to be a third grade, fourth grade student, so excited to start the school year, really excited to make friends and belong. And then all of a sudden you are being met with hostility. Or to be the other position, a parent who is hopes and dreams are so invested in their child's education and having to make the devastating decision of, do you keep them home and have them be safe, but potentially miss out on schooling, or send them to school and be worried about their safety, their excitement about learning, and really having to battle with that decision making. And so we're really bringing this to the forefront because right now, hate and divisive language has a massive platform. And though human migration nor divide and conquer strategies or the stereotypes that accompany them are new, what really is new is the way that this rhetoric is able to spread so rapidly. And we have to recognize the conversations that happen in these adult spheres, online, on TV, especially during a fraught election cycle, that they do not stay in adult circles. They translate directly into our classrooms with young people, where bigotry manifests as bullying and hostility in the classroom. And while, yes, fear and perhaps anxiety over the future is something that humans have experienced for a really long time, the solution to that is not more fear. It is not fearing the other. The solution to that fear and perhaps anxiety over the future is community. It's knowing that your neighbors, your coworkers, your community at large has your backs, that they love you, that they want to welcome you, that they would hold you should you fall, that should you have a need, people will step up to fill that for you. And so that is really how we are going to combat some of the fears that we have about the future. It is together, it is with one another, and it is by welcoming people who need us most. And it is almost, I would say, our civic duty to imagine a world where everyone is welcome. It is our duty to our young people, to ourselves, and to our elders to really commit to every single day imagining a world where all of us can thrive and be welcomed. And so I want to start this off with kind of a question to all of you and give us about a moment or two to really journal and think about, what does a welcoming community look like, feel like, and sound like? And while, yes, the chat is only being shown to the host and participants, if you want to add this to the chat, we will be able to send this out to you later. Otherwise, I'm just going to put a minute on my clock for those of us who are at home to perhaps journal and reflect. What would a truly welcoming community, being as imaginative as possible, what would it look like? What would you see? What would it feel like? How would it feel if you were having a good day or perhaps a bad day? You were maybe nervous about, a presentation at work, how would it feel knowing that your community members and your colleagues were celebrating you? What would it sound like when you maybe went into the grocery store or you went to file some forms at the mail office? What would it sound like to really be in a truly, truly welcoming community? And so I'm actually just going to put 1 minute on my phone to have some silence and for those of us at home to reflect. And so we've got about 1 minute starting now. And again, if you want to, you can drop it in the chat and we will send out those responses to you afterwards.
Misha, I'll just add, someone did put into the Q&A portion saying their response is a smile, being acknowledged, and also being noticed.
Oh, I love that. I'm seeing a lot of different messages as again, we as hosts can see them. So things looking like different people from backgrounds learning from each other, connecting with people who have a variety of different accents all in one space. And then a warm embrace every day, like feeling like you're at home, which is really beautiful. Okay, that is a minute. And again, we have a lot to cover today. I really encourage and implore almost all of us every single day to commit to imagining a world where everyone is welcome, imagining just a little bit of what each day might look like, feel like, and sound like if the work that we're all doing to make people feel like they belong is actually happening. And so while we talk about belonging, and we're here to be a part of kind of the Welcoming Week and Belonging Network and Welcoming Network, something or one of the conversations that's often left out is the role of schools, which is a challenge because schools are actually a fantastic place to start. One, this is already where young people are learning how to be community members. They're learning what it means to share, how to take up space, to let people have space, to be leaders, to solve problems together. So they're already learning what it means to be a community leader. And schools already have this community hub infrastructure. And we'll go into a little bit more about what that infrastructure looks like later in the webinar, but really just thinking the ability to serve many people in one space, large rooms, hopefully public transportation accessible. So really thinking about how we can already utilize things and resources that we already have to serve as many people as possible. And so while we're here, I know we're all from a variety of different places. And again, I'd love us to reflect as we dive into a little bit about reimagining migration and why our focus is on schools. How you, your family, your neighbors, community organizations, affiliations, and or volunteer groups are currently engaging with schools. I mean, perhaps you do have children in the school system, or perhaps you're already servicing in them in some way. And really just thinking, what is your relationship to the school system right now? And then perhaps how often are young people that you know of being elevated as community leaders? As we said, schools are where they're learning how to be community leaders, but they already are community members. And so what does it look like to have them really learning that their voices matter, that they can make change, that they can be a part of the world that they so desperately want to see? And so that kind of brings us to who we are as an organization and why we're putting on this webinar in collaboration with Welcoming America. And it really starts with this framework that was developed by Veronica Boyes-Boncia in collaboration with Project Zero. And it asks these 5 questions. First, who are the young people that we're educating? Really understanding that they are not a monolith. There is not one type of immigrant origin, newcomer student, or student who has been in the school perhaps since kindergarten. All of our young people bring vastly different assets and they come from a variety of different stories. But who they are and how to teach them and how we should teach them about migration, these are fundamental questions. How we can create powerful learning environments for all students is really what's driving the heart of our work. And then thinking about what are going to be the most important perspectives for a world on the move. How do we prepare our young people for that changing world? And how do we prepare and support and provide resources for our educators, right? Recognizing the service that they do every single day in teaching our young people. One of our core questions is how are we preparing them? How are we providing them with resources? And how are we pouring back into their cup with all that they do for our young people? And so again, that's why I want to thank you all for being here, because this is really how we're answering all of these questions is in collaboration with fantastic people such as yourself. But really bringing it back to why our focus is on newcomer and immigrant origin youth. And I know if we can start right away is they just have an equal right to education that, legally they do, but it's also just beyond language acquisition and language supports, which yes, there is a legal right to provide, but it's also what does it mean to have an equal right to education, to really see yourself as a part of learning, to develop an academic mindset and to be celebrated and to see yourself in your curriculum and that your stories are valuable. Next is like bringing with us that asset mindset that young people bring joy when they tell their stories, especially when those stories bring a new perspective to the classroom. That is how we create joy, by celebrating the uniqueness and the difference and the ways in which when we bring our whole selves and when we feel safe to bring our whole selves into community spaces, then that is when real learning is happening. And then also the knowledge, recognizing that people who are coming from a variety of different places throughout the world have different perspectives, different resources, different understandings, perhaps even too of like how to engage with the land, how to have different community and family structures, and how powerful those things can be, especially as we're thinking about building a sustainable future. And so how we can utilize that knowledge and share with one another and really, again, lean into those asset mindsets that all young people bring so much to the classroom. And kind of not even last but not least, but how serving one truly does serve all. We see this with IEPs and having scaffolds for all students. We see this with curbs on the sidewalk that, while originally built to be ADA accessible and for wheelchairs, serve mothers with strollers, people who perhaps need assistance getting up and down on the steps, that it has become a utility for all in the intention to serve one. But then just like, these structures that are intentionally made to keep unhoused people from sleeping on them, or the lack of public bathrooms, when you intentionally reserve services or try to only serve some, you ultimately end up serving none. Right now, no one has free spaces to sit throughout the city, or no one has publicly accessible bathrooms with an intent to just not serve one population. And so really, by focusing on our newcomer students, those who perhaps have the most need, we get an understanding of how we can serve all students, because by meeting those needs, we're making sure that all of the needs for someone who is new to a place are in system for whoever joins or whoever has been there. And so really, by, again, focusing on those who have the highest needs, we're able to address all of the students. And we also then have to think about what some of the challenges are. Because if we're trying to build these inclusive communities, we have to recognize that our immigrant origin students are facing challenges. And again, from where we started this webinar with and understanding what particular students are experiencing, our surveys have found that, one, immigrant origin students are reporting a lower sense of belonging compared to their non-immigrant origin peers, that they are discouraged from using their family's home language in classes, that there is an increasing report of bullying and harassment, that there's a difficulty discussing their race and ethnicity with school staff, that there's a lower sense of safety both in and outside of schools, and that also they're feeling a lack of representation in school curriculum. But the reason why, again, those things are so important is students actually come to school with so much excitement. And while I want to point out that this is a study done by Corolla Suarez-Osasco and et al., and is in 2018-2019, the findings from this research are that newcomer and immigrant and refugee students actually enter school with a great sense of optimism, excitement about learning, and a deep, deep hope for making friends. The unfortunate second part of that finding is, however, the longer that they are in US school systems, this optimism, this excitement starts to decrease and decrease and decrease year over year, the longer that they are in schools. And so if we can recognize that they're coming with this hope for learning and for making friends, because also they're young people and that's what they want, something is happening in the school system that is not leading to that, thus increasing or thus leading to a decrease in belonging. And so it then does happen when you look at the data. What's happening is bullying and harassment and ostracization, isolation. And I want us to look at this chart, not necessarily even for the differences in school, but at these two numbers. We're seeing 60% of schools reporting students making derogatory remarks about immigrants, and 82% of schools having derogatory remarks being made about other racial or ethnic groups. So not even in the distinctions between the types of schools, but just these big numbers here. Also, while recognizing the reality of what it means to be a young person and how often the comments that are made actually make it up to the teachers who then report. And so there's already this gap of reporting from what's actually happening with students and in their lives. For example, in the Southern Poverty Law Center's survey of just shy of about 3,000 teachers, 2/3 reported witnessing a hate or bias incident, with 18% of them being targeted specifically at immigrant students. And especially given the actual fraction of immigrant students that were in their schools, it being 18% is a massive number. And it's further exacerbated by the news and the stories that they're hearing. And they found that it was almost directly in response to stories that were going around. They were hearing in the adult world and then directly replicating in their classrooms. And then another study by them has also found that non-immigrant students reported that they were less likely to intervene when an immigrant student was being bullied. And so again, as we're thinking about this, we're also recognizing what it's like to be a young person and really how often those moments of bullying or hostility are reported to teachers, and then also what happens when you are just ostracized or excluded. Those are not things that are in this data. Those are not things that are reported, but those are things that you feel so deeply, especially when you're a young person who, again, perhaps one of their biggest desires is just to make a friend, and then they're in a space where they're feeling excluded or ostracized. And so we see this as a massive alarm bell. But it's just that a louder call for needs means we need to reimagine a world where we are serving all of our students. And what would it actually really mean for every single student to feel like they belong? Because as we said, when you see this information or the data on bullying and harassment, it is an alarm bell for every single student. Because what does that indicate to you about all of the students that are there? How safe and belong, or how safe and how much do they feel like they belong if there are these rates of bullying? And so that really brings us to our conversation kind of around belonging. It's this amorphous thing. What does it look like? It can be hard to notice as a teacher, especially if perhaps you're from the area that you're teaching in. You've always felt like you belonged. It can be really hard to put that finger on what belonging is. And really, what belonging is to be embraced. It's to feel safe, supported, celebrated, and to be able to engage in civic agency within a community. And really by civic agency, we mean to say, oh, hey, like I can actually run for the president of this club, or when I speak up because I think something should change, people listen to me, that I have important information to share, or that my teachers are investing in me, like I too could be a community leader in some way or some fashion. And so we've put together this belonging, but really we want to take a moment and look at the brain science and why belonging is actually so important when we're speaking about education and when we're speaking about schools. And the thing is that belonging actually has a biological reaction. When people feel safe and connected, they release this tremendously important hormone called oxytocin. I hope I pronounced that correctly. But it is an unbelievably important hormone for learning because it gives us the confidence to explore and create. And as those of us who are invested in schools know, to take risks. And taking risks, as the research shows, is one of the most powerful things for learning. To be able to maybe be wrong or to try out, you're trying to learn a new subject and to raise your hand and be wrong and be okay in that and learn the right answer. That taking those risks and feeling safe to do so, that your peers will support you in your academic exploration instead of feeling like perhaps you could be laughed at or excluded, that is really what creates such a powerful learning environment. And as our research has shown, and we will send the brief out along with this video as well, but belonging promotes so much amongst youth. It's psychological well-being, which is going to be important when I discuss the loneliness epidemic in a second. It's academic success. It reduces prejudice. It helps with identity development and mental health support. But belonging doesn't just happen. It is a result of deliberate policies and practices aimed at fostering inclusive environments. And again, the reason why this is so important is because we are in a loneliness epidemic. And this is at large, this is communities in total. This is not just young people, but as we said earlier, young people's worlds reflect that of the adults and the communities around them. And so we are seeing it in the children's lives as well. There is this epidemic of loneliness, despite the fact that kids spend on average about 5 days out of the week with their peer groups, right next to people who could be a potential friend, someone who's investing in them, reminding them about the homework, inviting them to do something fun after school to recharge, right? They're in these communities with their age group, and yet there is still this loneliness happening. And so again, when you see these alarm bells of saying something isn't right, it gives us this opportunity to reimagine what it could look like. And so we can pause here and play for a second and think, what could belonging in schools look like? Well, what if we had this vision where you're a third or a fourth grader, you've just arrived into town, perhaps from a long journey, and you look up and you see that your parents are so excited to step foot on campus, and they're so excited to advocate for you and your rights because they feel so welcomed into the school. Perhaps they're able to take a class after school, learning another language. Perhaps they're teaching another language in the school after school hours. Perhaps it's a craft that they're teaching or a trade that they know and are teaching to other people in the communities, but that you see them have a positive and excited relationship to being on the school campus and what that could do for you as a young person to feel like, okay, this is a place for me where I can thrive because I'm looking up and I'm seeing my parents, my guides, my community people really excited to be on campus. Or perhaps, you're a teenager who's just graduated from high school, not sure what your next steps are. What could it look like if you still felt really invested in your school? You still felt like you could go there again to maybe take one of the classes that the parents are teaching, to learn a new skill, to learn a new craft, to learn a little bit about what a career in your town could look like before deciding what school you want to go to next. That you knew no matter what, that there was a place that you could go to be enriched, to continue to learn, and to decide, how it is that you want to be a contributing member of society. Another thing that we can imagine is a world for perhaps new parents who could go to a class, again, perhaps taught by the elders or by these current parents who teach you how to be a new parent, and also in community with other new parents where you can already start to build that foundation to potentially share resources with one another. I'm done with this stroller because my kid just became this many months here, let me pass it around, and really being able to create that system, especially again as we think about the needs that we may have in the future. And then another group that I really really want to focus in on is the elders in our community. Maybe you no longer have a grandchild or a neighbor or a niece who's still in the school play or is still on the sports team that you used to go and witness. What would it look like if we really, really genuinely elevated, respected, and valued the elders in our communities? If they were teaching classes in the schools, that the knowledge that they possessed and the commitment that they've had to the community was genuinely valued and centered in our schools. If, they had the first row seats at performances, or they were given, a special honoree at games, and really making sure that there's always a touch point for them to be in community and to really revere the knowledge that they hold. And really, again, just imagining at the top of our heads, what could it look like if belonging was actually supported in schools and we resourced and supported our schools in serving these whole community needs? Because one, already schools do so much. They play this massive role in human development, whether it is the physical needs of our students, basic shelter, breakfast, lunch, physical development, education. You have movement and contact with other people and safety in one space. Their social emotional development, whether it's identity formation or socializing with other people, building who they want to be as a person, academic foundation being the core, learning foundational knowledge, critical reasoning, logical analysis, and creative expression and evaluation. Schools already play such a massive, massive role in human development, but we're also asking them to do so much more than that. So not only do they play this massive role, but when we actually take a moment to look at it, we're already asking schools to do a variety of things, and it really is time that we resource them and their ability to do so. Right? We see in that piece of human development that I've already covered, but also schools are often already civil service sites. They're disaster shelters. Sometimes they're voting locations. They often provide youth supervision and workforce development. They can also be sites of healthcare where they're providing mental health services to folks. I mean, you have your social workers on campus where they do physical health some places. Doctors, dentists, optometrists are coming in to serve the needs of communities. They also keep a lot of physical health records, and they do resource distribution. There are schools who help make sure that students have clean clothes to wear, where there's washers and dryers on sites to help on-house students still be able to access education. This is a work that's already happening. It's just time that we recognize what we're asking schools to do and then provide them the resources and the support to do so. There's also the fun of entertainment, whether it's sports competitions, performances, social gatherings, or cultural and historic events. Really thinking about how great it would feel as a young person to know that the whole town, your whole community is so, so excited for you to perform in the play. That, everyone is like, oh, I'm really, really invested in seeing how our young people do in this debate tournament, or, that everyone feels such a genuine investment in their young people, that we see actually school performances as a genuine form of entertainment and connection. And so the reason, again, I wanted to put all of this up there is schools are already asked to do so much, and the ways in which they're funded, supported, and resourced looks very different location by location. But a new vision that we could all commit to is, what if we made that our school? And so we want to pause here and think, how could your family, your neighbor, your organizations, affiliations, and volunteer groups actually build a world where schools are supported as the soul of your community, where lifelong learning and connection thrives, and where every human from any walk of life can go to and be welcomed. And I'm actually about to dive into with Marie an example of what that could look like, but I want to just pause here for a second and allow us to really think about this new vision of what it could look like if we were really centering schools as the souls of our community. And also, again, thinking about the ways in which we can bring education off the school campus and into museums and into libraries, right? Education doesn't have to stay in the school, but what if the school was the hub for connecting to all of these places? And so again, I'm going to put a quick pause right there as we discuss our next speaker. And so again, our panelist is a acting assistant principal, and so we were not sure if she'd be able to join or not. I'm not sure if I see Marie in the channels as well, but don't worry, we have a fantastic clip of her speaking, so you will still get her amazing content. But I just want to preview a little bit for who she is. She is a Haitian and an assistant principal. And so something that she speaks about is her experience and recognizing that her journey to the United States was very different from some of her students, some who came by boat and some who came from almost a 2-year journey through a variety of different countries to arrive in the United States. And so something that she did in response to the needs that she was seeing was she came up with a NEO International Academy, where she made really intentional partnerships with educators to make sure that all of her students' needs were met, that there were people in place to not just speak the language, but to provide them resources in terms of actually building out programs that were customized to her students' needs. And again, this is just someone who said, okay, I am going to first conduct a needs assessment, really understanding and asking her students, what is happening? What do you need? How can I step in? Next, she built a collaborative team, developed a culturally responsive program, secured resources and partnerships. And this is where fantastic folks like you come into play. It's reaching out to and knowing that there are people who, perhaps have an extra space after school to house a class, or perhaps to know someone who has extra jerseys to support this team, or, has a food that they want to promote and could then donate food to the school. And so really thinking about who are partnerships, where do we have excess, how can we partner with one another? Next, she implemented ongoing professional development for her teachers to understand some of the needs that her students were expressing and to equip trainers with effective ELL teaching strategies and trauma-informed practices. Because again, as she speaks to, and we will have on our website a little bit more of her story, that these students were coming from very different experiences, some of which were extremely trauma-laden. And so the responses to those needs look differently than, again, her and her family's travel to the United States, in which she came from a very well-resourced background. And then she also monitored progress and adjusted the needs as necessary. And so something that we want to be able to show you all is an example of her work in action. And so you might want to just turn up your mics a little bit here, because I'm about to play a really quick, about 1-50-second video of what she did to extend this work beyond K through 12, beyond the classroom, and into the community.
So transformative impact, like I said, as a result of that, as I was supporting the students, the parents were coming to the meetings every single month. Then another need came up. They started asking, Mr. Preval, is there any way we can learn English? Do you guys teach English here? And at the time we did not, but guess what? I identified a need. And immediately in May of 2023, I started the first Esau Community School in the city of Lauderdale Lakes for parents. I started with 75 parents. Now I'm well over 200 parents. The program is Monday through Thursday from 5 to 9, accommodating their time frame. Again, I was able, like I said, the first community school in May of 2023, and I am over, like I said, 200 students. Community partnership, what I've done. Look, you'll see over here, Handy and United Way. This is me connecting with these organizations to provide support. I also partnered with Feeding South Florida to distribute food to the families every other Thursday of every month. I hosted monthly resource fairs for the adult students, for them to be able to get jobs, for them to be able to get medical checks, for them to be able to get resources for their families, whatever. I was able to place, at that time, I was able to secure employment for 6 people, but now the number is 13. I have people working in some schools cafeteria, working as a teacher's assistant, custodial staff, or a bus driver. So transformative impact.
Okay. And so I just wanted to take a moment and really pause there and sit through what we just heard Marie discuss. And it's really thinking about all of the different ways that we can serve a community in whole. But if we're also bringing this just back to students in schools and education, students who are hungry or are navigating houselessness or seeing their parents stressed about jobs providing for them, it does not create the environment for thriving in our schools. And so by doing this work, by one, empowering her young people to be community leaders, her young people are volunteering after school, getting community hours to put together these food packages for families, but also in having it be a space where parents know that there's someone that they can reach out to that, one, is so deeply invested in their school's well-being. You know, that is one piece of mind off their, or stress off their shoulders, is knowing that there's educators who are deeply invested in their students. But two, that there is a contact, that there are places that they can go to be connected with others who want to help, who want to be a part of this community work, and really thinking about what does resource distribution look like? How can we, again, using what we already have, be able to support folks, right? She was saying that there was a need for people to work in the school cafeteria. There was a need for a bus driver. And now, by having families of these children do those jobs, you've provided, one, a stable income for a child's parent, and two, have filled a need that was there to serve the school. And so again, really thinking about how these things can be in relationship with one another, how we can lean on each other to fill our community needs and to have sustainability and security for our young people. And then, you know, again, as through our work and understanding the relationship with Marie and all that she's doing, and I'm sure she's actually attending to something right now that is super necessary, is that there are challenges. You know, she discusses securing funding and resources, and it really does take only a few people to start asking, hey, where do you have a little bit of excess here? Hey, if we promote this after school program, can we help get a few seats at cost for our students? Hey, you know, you need ushers here. How can we have our students be able to be at this play and also help be in this role? And really just thinking about how we can start asking these questions of each other of what could we do here? How can I get a young person to be in charge here? How can I, you know, have there be a young person as a community leader in this moment? Or perhaps, you know, you're a museum or a library and you're like, you know, we need more people to witness this art. Like, how can we have young people be the ones explaining the art? How can they be the people who talk to their community members and say, hey, look, someone like me is a leader in this space. This space is also for you. You know, and so really just imagining what securing resources and funding can look like. And that comes from asking questions, from leaning on one another, from really knowing who the people in your community are and what their needs might be. It comes back to that need assessment, but it also just comes back to talking with one another. It comes back to maybe just, even after this, setting one meeting in your school saying, hey, everyone who's invested in making this a welcoming place, let's all meet here and brainstorm. It starts with those conversations. And then there is navigating cultural differences. It's not to say that we should all assimilate or be one version of one community. It's the fact that everyone should have a lot of pride and love for their family, their background, their belonging, and their neighbors, right? It's navigating that, yes, you are different people, that your story is powerful and important, and so is the person beside you, and how, by celebrating both of your experiences, can you navigate differences that arise. And then it's also advocating for systems of change, of saying, hey, you know, perhaps we're in a school system that is struggling to feed our young people. what does food waste in the community look like? How can we bridge that gap, right? How are there areas where we have resource excess, and how can they fill the gaps where there is resource needs? And really, again, that comes from conversation and a really sincere commitment to the belief that everyone is a human and that there are basic human rights and that we all have different ways in which we can support. Maybe it's time, maybe it's resources, maybe it's just sending a really fantastic thank you note to people who do have time and resources if you don't. Maybe it's just a wave and say, hey, how was your day? I am from the Midwest, and sometimes it's just a good morning, to a new neighbor. Like, what are the little things that we can do? Because we all have some form of capacity in doing so. And next, it is really just, again, building those collaborative partners. Many of us work for organizations, are in affiliations or volunteer groups that are already doing amazing things. How can we just come together and connect to, again, make sure that someone isn't overworking or that they are having their cup refilled with joy and care and gratitude. I think that the core of this work is gratitude for each other, and that again, it assuages that fear to know that there are other people who, if you should be the person who is in need of resources, that they are there to fill those gaps. And so that is some of the challenges and obstacles. And then again, these are some different directions that she has for potentially sustaining impact, whether it's scaling the NEO International Academy to serve more students, or building out the Creole language program in her district, making sure that her students who come in can still access AP courses, perhaps in French or in Spanish, as well as in English. And so really making sure that we're meeting students where they're at. You have a variety of students who are perhaps learning philosophy and high mathematical equations in their native language, but then come to the United States and are really kind of back at scratch with learning some of like the foundational building blocks of the English language. So how do you still keep their mind engaged with materials that they were already learning while also supporting those fundamental building blocks? And so these are just some of the things that she's thinking about in terms of the future direction and being able to sustain her impact. And really, it just comes back to getting others to join in the movement. But the reason why we really wanted to highlight Marie in this moment is she is a fantastic person and a person, right? We all could do this work. She's someone who saw a need, who decided that she was going to be the one that was going to commit to making a change. And she reached out and she built a community. She had a principal that was on her team. She had, people who she met who are dedicated to doing this work, throughout her program. Again, as she's saying, she's feeding people. She's helped bringing doctors into the community to get parents their checkups, because again, health is how we're serving everyone. And so she was making all these connections, but her story is one that anybody could do. She is someone who has passion and she's brilliant and she has so much compassion for her students, and so do you, right? So does every person on this webinar. There, you know people, you have love in your heart, and you have compassion for your neighbors. And so it is all of us that can work together to build this new vision. And again, so it almost feels like they say just a person, but she is one of fantastic groups of people who are doing this work. And again, we're highlighting her story because it could be your story that we're highlighting in the next webinar. It could be the work that you have decided right after this. I'm going to go call like 10 of my friends who are in my weekend gardening club, and we're going to think about how we can perhaps teach young people how to grow food on the school lot. Like, we can teach them how to be able to be in these sustainable communities, and that would just be one thing that could be done. And so before I get too far into brainstorming, I want to preview our next webinar on October 9th, which I'll do in a second, but we would love to have you at our next webinar, where we're going to actually preview tools and resources that we have made that you can use directly in your community. But when we take a pause and think, what are adults' roles in building community? Because again, when you're an adult, when you're no longer in a school setting, some of the things that are so, so important, perhaps like who you're sitting next to at recess, or if anyone asks to sit by you on the bus, or to have, I want to say like a play date after school, the things that kids genuinely care about, that can feel so far removed the moment you're no longer in those settings. And so it is really important for us as adults in our communities to take a moment and say, what is our role in building belonging? Because our young people are going to be the leaders of the next, obviously of the world, but they're going to be the people that step up alongside us and build this world that we will need to be in community with one another. We will need to be able to, again, share and hold and support one another. And they are going to be the people that do that. But we need to make sure that they don't feel isolated, that they are learning as they're developing, that they have value, that they are loved, that they are community members. And so we can start with one, doing our own identity engagement. And so, again, these will be materials that we will follow up with you all in an email, but it starts with the ecology of identity, really thinking about who are you as an individual? What is your immediate context? What is the broader social context? What are you hearing often on the media about you, about people not like you, about what's possible for someone like you, what isn't possible for someone like you? Where is your culture represented in what you're learning? Do you see people like yourself celebrated? Do you see yourself in your community cultural events? And then the next thing, doing actually an environmental auditing of your surroundings. So after really sitting with, who am I? Am I someone who feels like they belong? Do I feel like I'm valued? And do my peers feel similarly to me? Is we have a self-survey that we'll be sending out that asks you to maybe reflect on your high school or adolescent experience. And then we have two other resources that we'll be sending out, and really a learning environment audit. And that's predominantly for people who are working in schools or who are there to be able to just take an assessment of what's happening in your school for students. And then a community evaluation form. And in that form, it's really just asking us to take a look around our communities. Where are there places for young people to gather that are safe, financially accessible, physically accessible, where there is supervision, but they're also able to be themselves and to build community, where, again, everyone is welcome. What do those spaces look like? What are those third spaces for young people to develop identity and to build friendships, where they're not expected to perform in an academic way? They're not, on a team having to, play, but they can actually just be themselves and discover different things that they're interested in, be that, crafts or music, or, what spaces exist like that in your town and community? Are they publicly transportation accessible? Are they health and safety accessible? Especially as we're thinking about still being many years into a pandemic. Like, if you have parents who are immunocompromised at home, are you still able to go places? Are there outdoor options? Are there ways for you to still be in community while also keeping your parents or guardians or family members safe? Many folk live with their elders in their families. Okay, how are they still able to be in spaces where they're building community without that fear of potentially getting their family member sick? And so there's all of these questions that are happening, and also really thinking about, what does that look like in your town and community? Are there spaces like that? If there's not, how could, potentially a group of parent volunteers get together to make sure that there is like an after school space for kids to just play, but be safe? Again, supervision important, but publicly accessible, free spaces for young people to gather. Where are the spaces for young people to be leaders? And then thinking a step back is, where are there places for adults to gather to share and meet and build with one another? Perhaps your kids are gone. How do you make a friend? What does making a friend in your community look like? Perhaps you've lived somewhere for 30 years. How do you make a new friend? What does that look like? Really just, again, taking an audit of our communities. How often do you go into the libraries and the local museums? How do you get there? How many are there? Are they accessible to you? Are they places where you really feel like you can be, and that you can make a friend, or you can and I say make a friend, but we are in a loneliness epidemic. So this is something that is so necessary. And so really taking a moment to pause and look around your community and say, where are there spaces for us to come together? And then also thinking, are there spaces where not everyone is welcome? Are there roads or streets where newcomer or especially immigrant origin students are like, hey, maybe it's not safe for me to walk home here. Maybe I have to run to the bus and run home because it's not safe for me to take a leisurely walk home. Do they feel safe just going to the library? Like, are there spaces where they also feel safe? And so really just taking a moment and assessing your community. And that is what I would ask you to do before our next meeting, so that way you can come with questions that we can have answered, or we can do what we can together to answer. And so before we turn to the Q&A, again, I just implore you to, one, continue to imagine the world that we could all live in, where we're supporting each other, where belonging is central to why we're showing up, almost even at school, and where we can think about schools and a commitment to lifelong learning as the thing that excites us every day. That, okay, we have some place that we know that we can go where we're going to learn something, where someone is going to say, hi, like, I'm excited to see you here. And where someone is really going to be invested in us and in our futures. And if we are doing all right, if we're doing okay, you know, and how we can turn that okay into feeling like we're thriving and that we're supported. And so, again, taking that moment to take an audit of oneself while committing to imagining this world that we could all live in, what a new vision where schools are the center of our community hubs. And in our next webinar, we will do a discussion of tools and some community in action. So give you some examples of what people are already doing. In fact, there are some educational and administrative leaders that we're hoping to bring in for a Q&A panel. But as we know and saw with today, when you have people that are doing amazing work, sometimes they're doing the amazing work at the exact time you want them to be at the panel. So we're going to do our best to have them live, but come with your questions, come with your observations, and hopefully come with some things that you've already started doing in your community to move the needle even just slightly, especially as we think about this back to school year that is also existing in a bit of a fraught election cycle. And so I will pause there. We have about 5 minutes for some Q&A time, hopefully. Then I'm just going to take like a drink of water now after speaking so much.
A well-deserved break there, Misha. Thank you so much. And while you're enjoying that well-deserved drink of water, I will kind of just do a little bit of a shout out for you and agree with this because one of our attendees was kind enough to say what a great presenter you are and how engaging and clear this presentation is. So truly great and an example as to why I was excited to have you present because I knew it was going to be amazing. So really appreciate it. We do have a few questions here, and we've got, like you said, about 5 minutes left here. So we'll get to as many as we can in that time. I will preface it also by saying that we know we've got this October 9th webinar coming up at 2 p.m., as you see on your screen. So I'm wondering if some of the answers you may give may actually be also provided or elaborated on during that presentation as well. And also, I want to point out to everyone quickly that your registration for today's webinar also registered you for that webinar in October. So you will not have to register again. You're already registered. And the link that you use to join today is the same one you're going to use for that one. So you have that information. If you do need it sent again, you can reach out to us. After we send out the follow-up email for today, we're happy to resend that out. But you are already registered, and we hope you will all join us on that webinar. So that now being said, let's jump into some questions here. The first one here is from someone who said, a question that they had brainstormed in their school is how can schools be hubs for the community, but still provide safety and security in the building? Wanted to see if you had any thoughts or recommendations about that.
Absolutely, I absolutely do. And I will get that in 1 second. I also want to highlight that Adam is also putting on a webinar on countering anti-immigrant prejudice strategies for educators on September 25th. And so we will, again, send out a little bit more of that information, but that there is also going to be a webinar directly on the rhetoric that's happening right now, which I know someone had mentioned earlier. So for this question, yeah, I think that this is a really beautiful question to brainstorm because, again, students feeling like they are safe and they are seen as one of the single most important things when it comes to learning. And so something that I think we can brainstorm on, and again, happens in your community and really depends on the job restrictions and qualifications in your schools, but bringing in parents. Again, I know there's obviously a lot of background checking, fingerprinting that has to happen. And so it can really depend, but bringing in local community folk, people who, again, know and care about the young people can also be a way to think about just having more adults in the hallways, having more eyes on the hallways, more people who perhaps, especially even to look like some of your students, say like, hey, oh, there's Marie at the very end. Okay, we can have her as answer this question. I'm so glad to have you here in the very last minute. So that is just a potential option, is just like having more community members in schools volunteering, more adults in the hallways, more eyes on things, more, again, caring eyes on things is never a bad thing when it comes to like keeping hallways, perhaps, you know, unsupervised stairways, now supervised. Marie, do you have any thoughts?
What? Tell me more. Like, what was the question?
I'm sorry, I wasn't sure when
I
you
heard
joined.
you talking, but I didn't catch the question, initial question. Good afternoon, everyone.
Welcome, Marie. Thank you for joining us.
My
I will
pleasure.
reiterate the question here for you and feel free to elaborate. So the question was, how can schools be hubs for the community, but still provide that safety and security in the building itself for individuals in there?
Okay, I think, okay. So for us, it's all hands on deck, right? We have all of our support staff aware. We explained the vision to everyone. The support staff aware. What I mean by support staff, I mean security personnel. I'm talking about social workers, guidance counselors. What happens is whenever students are out in the hallway, all these support personnel are actually out in the hallway as well. Talking to students, doing lunch, just letting them know, building relationships and let them know who to connect with and who to talk to. It's a constant student and teacher or staff relationship, right? And what we also do, and we bring in doing lunch, we have setups doing lunch, and we bring in the community members of the YMCA, members from Handy, just to connect resources to the students so they know other places to also go. And during parent nights, those same community members come to parent night so the parents are also aware of what we're doing at the school level. Another thing that we do, the school district is doing now, whenever an outside entity or an organization is coming in front of students, we request permission from the parents just to inform the parents of who's coming and why they're coming and what services they're offering. So making the student informed of the services that we offer and who's out there to help is critical.
Great. Thank you, Marie. So glad you were able to join us and elaborate and add to Misha's response to that question. I do want to recognize that we are at the top of the hour, which is when we'll wind up. However, I do want to take advantage of having both of you here. So to all of our attendees, if you do need to go, I completely understand. I do want to address at least one more question that has come in that a few people have asked, not only today, but also on the registration page for the webinar itself. So I'd love to address that, knowing again that we're going to go over a little bit. If you do need to drop, again, this is all being recorded. You will get this full presentation, so you will not miss the question and the answer we're about to address. But also want to, again, remind everyone to join us on October 9th at 2 o'clock. You already have the registration or the link to join on that day. If you need it as part of the follow-up email that we'll send out, we'll include that there. So with that, the question here that's come in is around, I guess, just really engaging during these difficult times. And so the question posed today is, sometimes folks around me push back on identity work with our colleagues by saying it's too heavy because some folks are just not ready to engage or share because it's a personal thing for them. So the question being, any suggestions about how to approach that when people that you're trying to engage with just aren't quite ready yet?
Absolutely. I think, listen, I think we're at a time where that's like a courageous conversation, right? Because it's here. So sometimes it's providing a safe space for people to be able to express themselves, because I think we've experienced that at our school as well. And I think staff members or sometimes students were apprehensive to kind of share and talk. But once you get one person give an experience, it's easy for somebody else to chime in. And I think it's also creating workshop. There's a workshop by the name of Courageous Conversation that sets it up in a very comfortable way for you to be able to have those difficult conversations. It's giving you scenarios in front of you and talking it out, right? And giving you real life situations so you can see how to apply things that you're learning, things that people are sharing, and giving your feedback. So I think it's necessary to kind of address it, but in a comfortable space, but we have to create that space of comfort. You know, we have to create that space.
I would absolutely support everything that Marie has said too, and really thinking about how there's opportunities for everyone's story to be brought to the table, whether it's the moving stories that we put on or the threads that our co-partners do, is like, how can you just ask a question that everyone can feel an ability to access to? And it's really then about building relationships and having each other feel seen and safe, and then having the more challenging conversations of recognizing that there are differences, that there is inequity, and that there is different ways, again, that we can show up and participate. But I think that the first step too is building relationships, trusting that the people that are maybe disagreeing with you also care about you and are invested in your best interest, that you have colleagues and that you are in community with one another, even if you disagree or even if the work feels challenging. And then again, also, I think making space where, like, if you are having challenging conversations, make it clear that, that that's what's about to happen, and that maybe you don't have a really heavy workload right after, or you're not about to go teach a class, that you're actually setting the environment for you to have challenging conversations and then having restorative conversations of like, okay, we know this is going to be a little bit of a tricky conversation. What are we going to do immediately before and after to build community?
Excellent. I'm so glad we addressed that, because it is, as you said, Marie, we're in it, and it is, a tough conversation to have, but certainly an important one at this time. So thank you both for addressing that, and thank you everyone for staying over a little bit. Those of you that were able to do so, we really appreciate it. Again, look forward to having you join us for our next part to this conversation on October the 9th. A lot of you were asking too about different resources and things of that sort. This next one is when we're really going to kind of delve into the tools and the resources, and share those with you. So I encourage you to please be there for that, so you can get all that great information as well. And a reminder, this has been recorded. We'll be sharing this out by the end of the week. Items shared today will also be shared as part of that. So thank you for your understanding, and we'll get that to you as soon as possible. But thank you, Misha. Thank you, Marie. So glad you made it to join us briefly here. But thank you both for everything that you shared today and for contributing into what you're both doing day in and day out to support everyone across the country and their communities. To our attendees who are working in the schools, who are doing the support, we appreciate what you are doing each and every day. And if we play just a little bit of a role in supporting you in that, we are thrilled to do that. So thank you for being here with us. We look forward to seeing you just in a couple of weeks, and have a great rest of your week, everyone. Stay safe. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.